Yo, are we live? We live? Yeah. All right. We live, y'all. What is up, y'all? And welcome to the very first episode of Allan's Anatomy, where we learn anatomy. You see what I did there? Um Today, basically what this whole series is going to be about is like learning about the different bones of the skull. And one thing I want you guys to know when you're going for it is disarticulated versus articulated, because there's going to be a lot of different structures that you see um, on these bones that you can pretty much only see when two bones are together. So make sure you guys have that down pat. And another thing going forward is don't just be associating things by color when you see these different bones, because there's like three different sets of like bones that they have, like towards like the front of there's like a color model, and there's like the plain like white model. And so when you're going forward, try not to just associate the structures with learning the color, because they might just throw out like one of those like bones like this, and if you're looking at color, you're gonna be like, oh no. And so make sure you learn both sets. I mean, it's the same structures, just basically learn how to identify them on the different models. And another thing is, I think that's pretty much it. Oh, anterior views versus posterior views, because when we get to bones like this bad boy here, the sphenoid bone, it's gonna really come in handy, like knowing which is what. And by the way, for the people that don't know, that never took neuro or anything like that, this is the best bone. Like, look at it. Look how intimidating it can get. Like, look. Ow. But the bones I have set aside for you guys today are three of the ones that I feel like learning first really helped out a lot. So here is my ethmoid bone here, nice and pristine. Looks like a ship, low key, like a little boat, a little ferry boat. Zero. Uh, my zygomatic bone kind of looks like the state of Idaho, maybe. What does Idaho look like? Did I really just butcher that? I think I butchered that. We're not gonna talk about that. And the next up bone we have that I talked about earlier in the beginning is my sphenoid bone. And as you can see here, how cool it looks like a butterfly, owl. Some people even say a plane. I don't even know where they got that one from, but hey, to each their own. The very first bone that I feel like we should start with first is going to be my ethmoid bone, as you can see here. And this is basically how it sits in your skull. I can't really like hold it to where it is, but it's just like, if you could just imagine, it's in the bone like that, but more right here. So it sits like that. And one of the things that I really noticed right off the bat was this giant mountain looking structure here. As you can see, it looks like a mountain. So this is my Crista Galli. Crista Galli. And a way to help me remember, there's a mountain in, I think, either Wyoming or Kansas or something like that, and it's called Crista Galli. So every time I saw that, I was automatically right off the back. I was like, I could be in Walmart, I could be in Target or something. And I thought of this, and I was like, Crista Galli, baby. Um, and then what you're gonna notice on either side of that Crista Galli here, and also on this side here over here, is these depressions located on either side. And in those depressions, this is called my cribriform plate. Basically, those depressions are called my cribriform plate, and it houses one of your cranial nerves, specifically cranial nerve 1, your olfactory nerve. And how I like to think of it, that nerve kind of sleeps in that crib. So cribriform plate on either sides. Um, Towards the sides here, this little smooth surface laterally, those little smooth surface here, and one over here. You're gonna have your orbital plates of your ethmoid bones, and there's gonna be a bunch of different orbital plates that we learned about later on. So make sure you say what bone specifically makes these plates. So this is my orbital plate, these lateral surfaces here. Perpendicular plate, if you go toward the midline, you see this large giant yellow structure here. It's kind of coursing all the way splitting the bone, basically splitting the bone down the midline. That yellow plate, that's my perpendicular plate there. A little yellow plate there. These neck structures, we have what's called conchas. So there's three different: there's superior, middle, and inferior. Inferior concha is going to be a bone that's by itself. It's not attached to any other bone. Well, it is, But once you see it, it's kind of you'll see what I'm talking about. And so here on the ethmoid bone specifically, we're gonna see the middle concha, these large giant structures here. They kind of look like shells here, and then to find superior concha, if you look deep in there, right in this area here. Like I don't know if you guys can. I'm gonna move this probe so you guys can see it, but it's gonna be right here on the tip of the probe. And I don't know, can you guys see in there? Once you see it in person, it's gonna make more. You'll be able to see it better, but it's right up in there. And I call this thing a probe, but it's just a sucker. um, and then at the very top, going more superiorly, looking down, we see these little pockets. These are my ethmoidal air cells on either sides. And that's basically it for cribriform. Oh, one more thing. Um, the anterior and posterior ethmoidal foramen, like I was talking about earlier, to see like different structures, you're gonna have to have multiple bones together to see the structure overall. And these foramen are one of those things that you're gonna have to see together. And so I don't know if you guys have seen that model in the front of the class. It looks like a giant homunculus, basically. It has like its mouth like wide open. It looks like it's saying ah or something like that. If you kind of look, let me show you what it looks like on Scully. Well, you can't really see it on Scully, but I'm gonna show you the general direction for you guys to look. Find your orbit and kind of look toward like the midline posteriorly ish, and you're gonna see those foramen. It's like two giant foramen. It's gonna be on that giant model in the front, and it's very cool to see once you get your hands on it. So that was ethmoid bone. One last look for it. There and there. Next up is zygomatic bone. And it seems pretty simple, very basic bone, but a lot of people can get these parts confused. So one thing you guys want to learn is what a process is. So process is basically when one bone kind of just projects to another bone, and you name it by where the bone is going to. So if I had a bone piece and it's projecting to like my temporal bone, I would call it my temporal process of whatever bone that it's on. And so here, what I like to do with this bone is like the 1, 2, 3 point, kind of like the 3 point reverse thing. The dude who doesn't know how to, I'm just kidding, drive. So if you look here, one thing that you notice is this little plate or dish looking structure here. I'm gonna bring it in closer. So right here, right in this area. So this is my orbital plate, this plate right here. And you want to be able to distinguish which side are we talking about when we're talking about zygomatic bone. So this one, since my orbital plate is in that midline, this is my left zygomatic bone. And so with this bone, the 3 point thing I was talking about, so this would be my first, the one that's attached to the orbital plate like this. This would be my second, and then the one that's back here is my third. And we're naming the processes. And so what you notice is 2 and 3 are on the same side. 1 is opposite of 2. So 1 is my maxillary process, and it's going to be that bone that's extending toward my maxilla. Like that. 2, the very top right here, that's connected to that orbital plate, like I mentioned earlier, is going to be extending toward my frontal process, and that's what you can clearly see if you look there. The one at the top going up toward my frontal bone up here. So that's what you're going to see there. And 3 back here is my temporal process. And you can guess what bone it's going to be extending to? Temporal, baby. Let's get it. And so if you look back here, let me show you guys. Here's my temporal bone right here. And you can see parts of it protruding outwards here. And you see this little piece here? This would be my temporal process because it's projecting toward the temporal bone. And if you guys want to see what it looks like, it's like that basically. And honestly, what I used to do with this one, just throw it on the ground. Not throw it on the ground like violently, but like throw it on a table. I mean, not the ground. Throw it on a table and point to it and then just name. And if you guys ever took neuro, that's basically what Baldwin told us to do in class. So that's all it is to it. It's nothing too fancy, and that's zygomatic bone. So now we made it to the end, and we made it to the last and the best bone in the body. This is my sphenoid bone, and they love this bone. So if it were me, I would learn this one a lot, like a lot. But it's learning other ones too. But this one is like golden. As you can see, it's kind of golden too. Ha, quinky dink. So with this bone, what you're gonna notice is there's a bunch of different structures, like holes, as you can see there and there and there. So you want to be familiar with how these holes look, and like an anterior view versus posterior view. And there's not really much to sphenoid. It's not the worst thing in the world. Um, and also one thing I want to mention is it's like a section in your notes, and it has like a page dedicated to what's running through these holes. So you want to be familiar with what's going to course through these holes because there could be a clinical that's associated with a damage of one of these foramen or canals or whatever, and you have different nerves and blood vessels running through them. So you want to be familiar with that. But there's this one. I'll talk about it later. But jumping right into it, this is an anterior view of the sphenoid bone, and like I was talking about earlier, it kind of looks like an owl. As you can see, it's like eyebrows at the top, the wings towards the side, and then the legs down here. And the eyebrows, let's start off with those. I call them eyebrows, but it's actually another wing. So these little parts here, there, then the one on this side are actually called the lesser wing of the sphenoid bone. The lesser wing of the sphenoid bone at the very top part. Um, yeah, if that's lesser, then guess what this giant structure is right here. So this will be my greater wing of the sphenoid bone. This one here. And then the little legs that you see dangling off down here, I'll call my pterygoid plates. You have two. So you have one medially, that's my medial pterygoid plate, and then one that's more lateral, that's my lateral pterygoid plate. And if you look very closely here, this little hook, or as I like to call it, a little talon on the leg, kind of like a bird, like an eagle's talon. This is called my pterygoid hamulus. So hamulus, just think of hook. Hamulus actually means hook. It's a fun fact. I actually looked that up when I was a student, and it means hook. So keep that in mind. Um, so those are like some of the big structures I can see right off the bat. And we're going more toward the eyes of the owl, since we said this looks like an owl. If you look at the eyes, we can push this probe through. So this is my sphenoidal sinus. So this is my sinuses in here. And then what's separating them down the midline is my sphenoidal crest. So crest down the midline. It kind of looks like the nose of the owl, low key. So that's that. And so now what we want to jump into is more of the smaller structures associated with this bone. So going back to the lesser wing here, greater wing. If you kind of look, turn the sphenoid bone kind of to one side. If you look at the lesser wing, you're gonna see a hole boring through it, right there. And you can stick a probe through, and it comes out the opposite side. And so this is what's called my optic canal. And like I was talking about, you want to learn what's running through these holes. And so this, what will be running through here, is what's going to be called my optic nerve. Right, running right through here to get to your eyeballs. Because I mean, if you can think about it, the sphenoid sits like this, but more like, I mean, if I were to overlay it over, it'd be like that. And so your optic nerve has to run through there to get to your basically to get to your orbit where your eye is. And so that's the path that it travels. Going back to the lesser wing there and the greater wing, what we see in between the two is this giant little fissure. And this is called my superior orbital fissure right there. Nothing too fancy about it. And it's going to be a bunch of nerves that's running through it. Right below that, we see a foramen here, or a hole. This is called my foramen rotundum right here. If I had like a smaller probe, it can go all the way through. But this little lollipop is kind of crazy. And so that would be my foramen rotundum. More immediately to that, we see another hole here, right there. And you see it's attached to the pterygoid plates, and that's a key indicator for what it is. This is my pterygoid canal. And the good thing about this one versus rotundum, I know they look similar. With rotundum, if you had a probe, you can push it through. Pterygoid canal, it doesn't go all the way through. So I kind of use that as like um, a good way to help me learn the difference between the two, because you never know how they might like flip it or might show it from the back. So if you just kind of have those types of ideas in your head and tricks, and you'll be fine. Um, and that's mainly the structures that you can see from the front side. And so now what I want to do is turn it over to the posterior aspect or view. And we're going to pretty much go over those same structures we just did. So at the very top again, we saw the lesser wing right there. We saw greater wing here. We saw those pterygoid plates, both medially and laterally. And we saw that little hamulus there, little hook there. And now we want to dive more into it, into the other structures that we learned as well. Well, on the lesser wing, remember we said the little hole that's boring through it, that's my optic canal, where my optic nerve is going through right there. If you want to see it from the front again, it's just that. Between my lesser and greater is my superior orbital fissure right there. Below my superior orbital fissure, we have foramen rotundum right there. If I had a probe, it can go through. And these next two foramen, if you kind of look at a more superior view, you see this giant little oval looking structure, and you see a little baby tiny foramen right there. So this foramen is kind of named by the shape. It's called foramen ovale or foramen ovale, however you guys want to say it. And this foramen next to it, little baby one, is called foramen spinosum. Small spinosum, very small and tiny. And like I said earlier, you want to know what's coming through these foramen, because once we do infratemporal fossa, I think that's one of like the greatest dissections. Or I mean, it's very simple, but it's like very cool to learn. You're gonna actually be able to associate and see what's coming through these foramens, and I think that's like the coolest part, to actually be able to trace something back to how you learned it in notes. And so that's one thing you're gonna learn later. Dealing with foramen spinosum right here, if you kind of look more laterally to it and go a little bit more posteriorly, this little edge here is called the spine of the sphenoid bone. The spine. And how I used to associate that with that. So before I used to call it spinosum, I used to call it spinosum for some odd reason. And so I always kept like the spine of the sphenoid was kind of near it. So it's called spinosum, but whatever makes you learn. Do what makes you learn. Um, Going back up. Let's start up, then we're gonna go down. So going back up to the lesser wing, if you go posteriorly from it, we see this giant depression here, like all the way in there. So this is what's called my hypophyseal fossa, or my sella turcica. And basically what's going to be in here is where my pituitary gland sits. So if you can just imagine a giant pituitary sitting in here. And what's important about this is, if you can just imagine this location, what do we see? That optic canal. Well, it's running through that optic canal, an optic nerve. So if we have any problems with the pituitary, something happened, it's releasing an overabundance of hormones or something, it's growing large, then that pituitary can essentially compress that optic nerve running through here. And so you might have patients that have a pituitary like problem associated with them, but you might also have them having vision problems as well. So you want to keep things like that in mind. That's why it's important to know what's running where and like the location of things. Going back to the lesser wing, if you see here, my probe is, if I go a little further back, further back, you see this little tip of where my probe is. It looks like it's touching this part back here. But this part here that's on the lesser wing is called my anterior clinoid process. Right there. I'm trying to focus this camera. It's hard. I don't see how people do this. So there's my anterior clinoid process there. Right there. So if that's my anterior clinoid process, back here, right here is my posterior clinoid process. And if you look at it, it looks like a bed. 1, 2, then 3, 4. And basically what clinoid means is like bedposts. And so if you ever think about like those old fashioned like beds that used to have like the cars, Power Rangers, Bratz dolls, and all that little coverings on them. The little wooden posts. Those are like the clinoid process. You have four of them, just like you have four clinoid process. And so in between, so if you find a posterior clinoid process and you go more medially from that, you have what's called the dorsum sellae. It basically is like the saddle part here, saddle dorsum sellae. Um, Going back down. So remember, the foramen rotundum is right underneath superior orbital fissure. And then this hole right here. Actually, let's start down here first. I think it'll make more sense if I do it this way. So medial pterygoid plate, lateral pterygoid. I said pterygoid. Might be pterygoid plate, lateral pterygoid plate, and in between them two, you see this little half moon shaped structure. Remember, anything that's like a half moon is called a notch. Full moon, full circle is called a foramen. And so this is my pterygoid notch right here. A little half moon shaped structure. This little depression that's inside the sphenoid bone. I mean, not sphenoid bone, the pterygoid plates in between the two. This giant depression here. That's called my pterygoid fossa. And there, it's pretty big. Above it, right here, the skinny one, is called my scaphoid fossa. And I used to call it skinny scaphoid back in the day. Skinny scaphoid. Um, and then right above that, that's why I like to start from the bottom. Here, this hole right here, it's that same hole we saw in the front that's connected to the pterygoid plates, that pterygoid canal. And so that's what it looked like from the front, and this is what it looks like from the back view, right there. And right above it, we have this little tongue-looking structure, and that's my lingula. So we already seen lingula on the lung. So lingula, the left lobe, the superior lobe of the left lung. Don't forget that. But now we have the lingula of the sphenoid bone, and that's what you see, this tongue-looking structure, and it's kind of like right above the pterygoid canal. It's right there. And I honestly believe that's it for Spino. It's not like the worst thing in the world as people make it out to be. It's actually pretty easy once you go through it and learn it. And it's one of the cooler bones, like I mentioned in the beginning. And I hope you guys really learn to appreciate this learning and stuff. I sound like a teacher now. But yeah, I'm gonna be releasing more videos for you guys to learn from, since I won't be able to be there and actually show y'all like I did last semester. But hope you guys really enjoy it, and don't forget, infratemporal fossa is pretty cool. And last thing but not least, welcome to the best and funnest block out of gross anatomy. I'll see you in the next one.